And like what my colleagues have said, Madam Speaker, the reason why the drafters of the Constitution looked into three areas where money was supposed to be divided, Madam Speaker. Because when you look at the Constitution states that money shall be divided among three entities. Entity 1 is the national government, Entity 2 is the county governments, Entity 3 is the Equalization Fund. Madam Speaker, the reason why the drafters of the Constitution looked at the Equalization Fund was because of so many reasons. And I think one of the reasons is, Madam Speaker, if you look at the concept of the colonial wars, if you look at the concept of even the colonialists invading other countries, it was because of fight for resources. When you look at tribal wars, wherever they are, whether from time immemorial to the current, it is because of fight for resources. When you look at even the political contests that we have, in every country, Madam Speaker, the bottom line is that everybody is fighting for resources. And that is the reason why we have all these contests. And I think the reason why the drafters of the Constitution felt that we should have an allocation called Equalization Fund was because they realized that from time immemorial, there are areas which has been marginalized, both by governments and by nature. Madam Speaker, when I speak about governments, I mean there has been successive governments in this country, from the colonial government to the pre-independence or after independence. We have had governments and successive governments. And when the drafters of the Constitution were looking at this Equalization Fund, they meant, and their major intention was that, look at the areas which has never had any favor by any government. And that was meant to be equalized with the rest of the country. Madam Speaker, there are also areas which have been marginalized by nature or by natural causes. Areas which do not or is not even able to do agriculture and any other agricultural activities or economic activities, Madam Speaker, that can help those areas. This is an area where the drafters of the Constitution intended to allocate this money. Madam Speaker, the Constitution Article 204 states that there shall be 1.5% of allocation to the equalization. Madam Speaker, it also talked about the marginalized areas, and it talked about the marginalized communities. That is on Section 6, I think Section 4, Section 5, where it is talking about the marginalized communities and marginalized counties. Madam Speaker, when the CRA started working on these particular marginalized counties, Madam Speaker, it picked 14. And the reason why they picked 14, Madam Speaker, was based on several issues, just like what my brother here said, poverty index, and so many other issues, Madam Speaker. The 14, Madam Speaker, it was supposed to be allocated money from 2010, immediately after the promulgation of the Constitution. Madam Speaker, my constituency was one of the beneficiaries because it was falling under Narok County. It's falling under Narok County, Madam Speaker. But we benefited 5 years after the promulgation of the Constitution. And after that, Madam Speaker, no any other money has been allocated. The only other time, Madam Speaker, when this money was allocated is, I think it is now. So we have had 2 allocations. And when you read, Madam Speaker, Section 6, Section 5 of Article 204, it states the unspent money, what is supposed to be done to the unspent money? It is supposed to be kept and utilized. But if you were to do a simple math, Madam Speaker, from 2010 up to 2024, which is 14 years, how much money is that? Who has been spending that money? Where is that money? We are 6 years to the sunset of this particular fund. Madam Speaker, and not even that, before the CRA introduced another model of allocating this money. Because initially, Madam Speaker, the 14 counties which were benefiting only benefited once. By the time they introduced 34 counties, Madam Speaker, what happened to the money that was supposed to be spent on the 14 counties? Because the 14 counties came up to late 2020. These 14 counties, which are supposed to benefit from 2010, 2011, 2012, up to 2020, and have never benefited, what will happen to the money that was supposed to be sent to these particular counties? Madam Speaker, even when I look at the current allocation, Madam Speaker, done by CRA, it's alarming. It has never even assisted anybody, because the 14 marginalized counties has never risen from where they were. In fact, just like what my colleague has said, the number of marginalized counties are increasing. They increased from 14 to 34. What does that tell you, Madam Speaker? It tells you the government is doing nothing to alleviate the poverty level of our people. So that by now, instead of 14, we now have 34 counties which are marginalized. Who is marginalizing these counties, Madam Speaker? So, me, myself, I support this amendment by the Senate, but I would wish the committee concerned to relook, and that is the budget committee, to relook into areas, into the monies which has not been spent from 2010 to the current, and ensure that the 14 counties which were allocated this money from 2010 to 2020 are given their money so that they can spend on the correct, on the right projects which they had stated or which are stated in the Constitution. Madam Speaker, I wish, as a beneficiary of this particular allocation, Madam Speaker, to state also that inside the marginalized counties, inside even the inside the Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker, which was meant to cure the marginalization, there is also a very serious marginalization inside the picked counties. Because, Madam Speaker, if you look even at how the disparities which were done, you go and start identifying using the sublocations or even wards, so that if this money was allocated one constituency, you will realize they are allocating maybe 2 or 3 wards. What will the rest of the wards say? It is causing a lot of turmoil. So, Madam Speaker, my contribution is that the committee concerned, which is the budget committee, should look into the monies or the balance which was not allocated to these marginalized counties so that they can get their fair share. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the CRA should use a model that will purely identify the areas which were marginalized both by the governments and by nature, so that we can actually bring these people to the equal level. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, we'll be saying we are doing equalization, or we are allocating equalization funds and not doing what is supposed to be done. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to support and wish to ensure, or ask the committee that is concerned to ensure that they implore upon the CRA so that they can do proper allocation of these particular funds. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Boroza.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for this opportunity. And Madam Speaker, right from the onset, I'd like to lend my support to the Equalization and Appropriation Bill from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I stand on the strength of our Constitution, which was promulgated in 2010. That Constitution dictates that every Kenyan is equal to the other Kenyan. Madam Speaker, which means that every area in this country is as important as any other area. Madam Speaker, because of that, in the Constitution, you find very many affirmative action programs, either to bring people who are otherwise undermined to the point of level with every other Kenyan, or to bring areas that were underdeveloped to the point that they were nearly as equally as developed as all the other areas in Kenya. And Madam Speaker, that's where the Equalization Fund comes in, to bring up those areas which are underdeveloped in key elements that are necessary for human life, like education, infrastructure, including hospitals, including schools, including roads, so that we all feel like, indeed, we are all Kenyans. Madam Speaker, I served as a commissioner in the IIBRC Commission, also known as the Legale Commission. Madam Speaker, I went around the whole country. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to let you know that there are parts of this country that are so remote, parts of this country that do not have what we call roads. Madam Speaker, many of those children in those parts of the country have not even seen cars. Madam Speaker, Equalization Fund was meant to make these people who are in such parts of the country to actually feel like they belong to this country called Kenya. And Madam Speaker, for this reason, I support this bill, because this bill will bring those areas that are undermined or underdeveloped to the fore, so that they are also developed nearly as possible as the other parts of this country. Madam Speaker, it's a shame that we are almost getting to the 20 years time limit for this Equalization Fund. What will then happen when 20 years lapse and we've not benefited from this equalization bill, affirmative amendment, affirmative action opportunity? Just because money that's been appropriated has never been used towards this effort. Madam Speaker, I support this amendment bill from the Senate because what it does is it locks in the money that is meant for Equalization Fund, such that even if one financial year passes, it will still be locked for that purpose that it was intended for. Because that is the only way to go, to ensure that those areas that are underdeveloped are actually, the money that's intended to bring them up is used for that purpose. Madam Speaker, as I stand here, because I believe in this equalization, I believe that the whole country is not equal. Madam Speaker, for that reason, I will never support this 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote, whatever it's called. Madam Speaker, because this country, there's so much discrepancy in the development of this country. And you need Equalization Fund, you need affirmative action to bring other Kenyans who are not benefiting like every other Kenyan to the fore, so that they can also enjoy being Kenyans. Madam Speaker, I want to say again, categorically, I support this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Majority Whip.
My point of order.